Honored listeners, sovereign allies, and noble guests from across the realms of royalty, diplomacy, and innovation. Welcome to the Summit Sessions podcast, where vision finds its voice and legacy is not just preserved, but powerfully reborn. This is no ordinary gathering. Here beneath the banners of destiny and noble lineage, we meet upon sacred ground, a mountaintop of dialogue where ancient bloodlines meet modern brilliance, and each word carries the weight of heritage and the fire of what's to come. The Summit Sessions is a sanctuary for the visionary and the valiant, leaders, dignitaries, creators, and change makers, those who shape not merely economies or institutions, but the very purpose of our age. In this sovereign space, we honor the timeless call to elevate the human spirit and chart new courses of power, peace, and progress. I am your host, Lady Katelyn Natalie Bracewell Swinton, Royal Emissary of the Royal, Noble, and Imperial House of Alaroon and Director of Business Development for Herbert Northregalis. It is my profound honor to guide you through this exalted summit of sovereign voices and timeless vision. Let us begin. Where each summit reached becomes the sacred ground for the next ascent. Good day, everyone. Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Summit Sessions podcast. I'm your host, Lady Katelyn Natalie Bracewell Swinton, and today with me, I have with me the esteemed Larry Neymar. How are you doing today, sir?
All good.
Now, to begin, if you don't mind just giving the viewers just a brief background on you.
Grew up in New York, and the family was my dad was from Turkey, my mom's family is from Russia, Siberia. Anyway, ended up in the cable business right out of college, but on the technical side, I mean, where I put the wires together under the streets of Manhattan. And but ended up probably best known as the founder of E Entertainment Television, the cable network for that brought you Kardashians and all of that kind of stuff. Um, and then I've started media companies. I had a big TV show in Russia for 11 years and started a big music festival there where we raised the money for the Children's Hospital and the orphanage every year. And more recently, I've jumped over. I've been doing a lot of stuff in China. So I have a media company in China, and what's interesting about that is I produce only in Chinese and Mandarin language for the Chinese people specifically. And with COVID, started doing stuff here in the U.S. again, mostly things that would have a social impact. So, it's kind of at the point where if it doesn't have any positive impact on society, I tend not to do it anymore. So that's kind of what I'm up to.
That is amazing. Your career began as an assistant underground cable splicer in Brooklyn. How did that early hands-on experience shape your understanding of the media industry and influence your approach to building E-entertainment television?
Sure. Well, I was working as an assistant underground splicer in Manhattan, where, when I graduated with an economics degree and then quickly found out there weren't a heck of a lot of jobs for economists out there. So I took what I thought was going to be just a temporary job till I figure out what you do with the economics degree. And somebody I knew was in the electrical workers union. And they said, "Oh, we just organized this thing. It's cable TV. I'm not really sure what it is, but you go see the shop steward there and tell them the union sent you, and they'll give you some temporary job." Which I did. So they hired me to be an assistant underground splicer. I wasn't even the splicer; I was the assistant for $90 a week. And my job was every day I would open up the manholes in Manhattan and go down and put the wires together with the roaches and the rats and come up at 5 o'clock every day. But, I very quickly started to use all the equipment, the technical equipment, much quicker than most people there. And, they would always say to me, they go, "Hey, kid, how do you know how to use that equipment? You only been here a week and other people don't know how to use it. They've been here a year." And, for me, it was rather simple. I'd say, well, I read the instruction booklet. So it wasn't really complicated. But so I kind of went from assistant splicer, then I became a splicer myself, and then I became a construction guy, which I would climb through the backyards of Manhattan, and then an installer, and then a service guy. And then what had happened was the union was negotiating a big contract. Time Incorporated, which then it was before Time Warner, so Time had bought the company, and there was a big contract negotiation. And the union guy there said, "Hey, kid, you know how to read and write. We're going to put you on the negotiating committee." So I did that, and we ended up negotiating a pretty successful contract and stuff. And for whatever reason, I think I was 23. They made me the vice chairman of the cable TV workers for all of the whole metropolitan area. And then one of the Time Inc. guys, they're all Harvard and Yale's, all Ivy Leaguers and stuff like that. And they put in a guy named Nick Nicholas, and they put him in as president of Manhattan Cable. And then he later went on. He was like one of their golden children. So he ended up being the chairman of Time Warner way after the merger. But he liked me, and he said, we want you to come into management. For a year I resisted, but then finally I went into management. And I think I was 25 when I became director of operations in Manhattan, which was kind of crazy because I had like 300 and something people reporting to me, most of which were older. But I really understood the whole technical side of how you build cable systems. And I wasn't in charge. The things I wasn't in charge of, I didn't have finance and I didn't have programming. And so I had everything else, all those operating departments. And then kind of around 1980, all the big cities began to franchise cable because they realized cable was going to be for more than just good reception. So the big cities began to franchise it, but the caveat that most of them had was they wanted the cables to go underground as opposed to on telephone poles, which was typically the way rural cable systems were built. Somebody won the franchise, a Canadian company won the franchise for New York, for Los Angeles, I'm sorry. They needed someone who knew how to build underground. So I was 30 years old, 31, ended up recruited to go out to Los Angeles to build a Valley Cable, which at that time was the first 61 channel two-way cable system out there. And, so that was kind of crazy. I was the youngest general manager of a cable system in the United States. And, but you're a Brooklyn kid and you're out in LA and everybody's going to movie premieres and parties with celebrities and stuff like that. So I called up the studios and, I said, put me on the list. I want to go. And they went, no, you're like a utility. You're like the phone company or the gas company. And they wouldn't do it. And then finally I met someone in one of the studios who was in marketing. And I said to the guy, I said, listen, the most effective vehicle you have for marketing a movie is typically that 2-minute movie trailer. But yet the only time I ever see a movie trailer is when I'm already in the movies. I said, wouldn't you want me to see that when I'm in my house to make me want to go to the movies? And they went, yeah, you're right, but it's too expensive. So I said, you know what? I got 61 channels. And at that time, there weren't 61 channels. I said, give me those movie trailers. I'll put them on TV for free. And but you put me on a list for those parties and the movie premieres. And the guy said, yeah, sure, if you'll do that. So, we did it. And we didn't even give it a name. But when I started doing market research studies, what's your favorite channel? People go, I love CNN, I love ESPN, I love that trailer channel. And I'm like, really? Okay. So I get the best 2 minutes of a $50 million movie for free and people love it. So I kind of filed that in the back of my head. And then the company that I worked for had sold and they went back to Toronto. They went to Canada. And they were like, okay, Larry, how fast are you going to move up to Toronto? And I go, no. I said, I didn't go from Brooklyn to LA to go to Toronto. I said, I'm done with gold. I said, I'm staying here. And a friend of mine from New Jersey, Alan Marufka, he was out there and, he came from Jersey and his background was architecture and stuff. And we just both loved LA and we wanted to stay. So we started kicking around ideas, and he was going, yeah, I love MTV, because at that time MTV showed music videos. And he goes, I was thinking, how come nobody's done MTV of the movies? And I'm like, wait a second. I said, those movie trailers are the same as like a music video. The film industry's equivalent to a music video. So they're standing a host in front of a green screen and going, hey, Madonna has a new video. I said, we could stand a host in front of a green screen and say, and Schwarzenegger has a new movie. So we wrote a business plan. We thought we were brilliant. And we went around, and it was like 3.5 years that we were looking for any money. People would say to us, that's a nice idea, but you're not Time Warner and you're not Fox. But people don't start TV networks. It's just big media companies start TV networks. But finally, after 3.5 years, we found someone on Wall Street who was willing to give us, he said, I can give you $2.5 million, but that's it. And we were like, well, the going rate to start a TV network these days is 100 million. I mean, what are we going to do with 2.5? And he goes, well, I'm sorry, I really like your idea, but I'm not allowed to sign for more than 2.5. So Alan and I just looked at ourselves after 3.5 years, and we said, nobody's given us the 100 million. We'll take the 2.5. So we took it. And I had a friend who was teaching radio, television, film at the University of Texas in Austin. And I called him up and said, hey, Brian, do you have any folks that need intern jobs for the summer? And he said, yeah, we had trouble placing a lot of kids this year. I said, great, send me all you got. So he sent us 31 kids from Austin, Texas. And people don't realize, because he now is a monster. It's in 142 countries. The valuation is up, I don't know, $7-8 billion or whatever it is. But he started with only 11 employees and 31 interns.
That's small compared to most media productions. They usually have hundreds of employees.
Yeah, once we got that first money, we went on the air. Everybody looked at us and said, "Oh, why don't you tell us that's what you want to do? We would have given you the money 3 years ago." We grew, so the company grew literally from 11 employees to 1,100 employees in 2 years.
Now, when you started with your e-network, with your partner, with the $2.5 million as your investment, what strategies did you employ to maximize the impact, as well as competing with well-funded networks?
Yeah. Well, we didn't have money to really buy the best equipment and all of that stuff. So, we actually, for our broadcast equipment, we couldn't afford to buy professional equipment. So we found some company that had old video equipment that we're using for sales training tapes. So we bought that, and we just said with very little money, we're never going to dazzle people with fancy production value. But we really looked and said, we're going to put all our money on finding the right hosts, to introduce the movie trailers at that time, the equivalent to music videos. And so people don't realize, they said, oh, you were so lucky you had those great hosts at the beginning. And, we had Greg Kinnear, who went on to win the Academy Award, and Julie Moran, the first woman to do Wide World of Sports, and Katie Wagner went on to do Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and so on. But that was not an accident. I mean, we said with the limited amount of money, we're never going to, outproduce someone, but we can pick hosts that people either love or hate, but feel something. So the first 5 hosts would know. We put, I think, 7,200 people on tape. At that time, there was tape, not digital, and to pick the first 5. And, so people loved it. And we were very irreverent because, Alan and I didn't come from big media companies and stuff. And we just always looked in and said, Hollywood is funny stuff. It's not rocket science. And so we just took this very irreverent attitude there. And, people were watching and go, wow, this looks so cool. It looks like we're watching stuff we're not supposed to, and we never saw it before. Then if you were a movie fan, you watch the show like Entertainment Tonight, you got a 10-second clip of a movie that was coming up, next week. Here we had 24 hours a day. So when we covered a movie, we would do 30 minutes on what the movie was coming out, and then here's a piece on the director, and here's a piece on the stars, and here's a piece on the guy who created the music, and here's the one who did the makeup and costuming. So it really became something that people who love movies just were really getting a level of depth that they never had before, and getting it in a way that, again, was in a very different way than they saw it. I mean, the first um, time we ever covered the Oscars, which was kind of funny because we applied for credentials and we were rejected. The Film Academy said, no, you guys are like a utility. You're some dopey little cable network. We're not giving you any press credentials. And we literally snuck in, we climbed over the fence and we snuck into the Academy Awards. We're walking on the red carpet. We got thrown out after half an hour, but we would be talking to people, and it really did change TV or internet and the way celebrities are covered these days, because then, people go, so Tom Cruise, tell us about your next movie. We were like, whoa, those are great shoes, Tom. Where'd you get those? So we started doing a lot of stuff about celebrities more as people than celebrities as celebrities. And then when people watch the Oscar stuff, they go, that was amazing. We felt like we were a fly on the wall and we were watching something we weren't supposed to. And we were like, yeah, we were. That was kind of the breakthrough. And then cable systems began to realize that people loved it, and they started carrying us, and then sponsors jumped on. And then we did our first show, half-hour show, which was a thing called Talk Soup. At first, when I said to the production people, I said, I want to do a TV show that makes fun of TV shows. And they were like, Larry, you're out of your mind. You can't do that. And I'm like, why not? I mean, there's so much dopey stuff on television. I said, why can't we just show clips of those shows and poke fun at them? We did that, and that show was Talk Soup, and that show ended up running 26 years. And so that was the first one, and then Howard Stern was the second, and obviously Howard went on to do some bigger and better stuff, and so it was very irreverent. And the fact that we didn't have money forced us to be incredibly creative and use that money unbelievably wisely.
That's genius. You have most people that they wouldn't even be as creative as you and your partner were when it came to building.
Yeah, well, when your back's up against the wall and you don't really have money, your brain begins to figure out, how do I maximize whatever I got?
That's inspiring. Now, after E, you ventured into international markets with projects like ComSpan Communications in Russia, and then the Meton, am I pronouncing that right? Meton Global Entertainment Group in China. What was your motivation to expand globally, and what lessons did you learn from these international endeavors?
Well, even when I was still at E, and I just realized that sometimes it's better to not be in the big media world and stuff, because you kind of can have a stand back, clearer vision of things. I always looked at and said, Hollywood, going back to the beginning of the film industry, if you wanted to make any kind of visual entertainment, you needed big sound stages, and you need these very expensive cameras and uniquely trained people to make it. So no matter where you are in the world, you had to come to Hollywood, where we had the big studios and the back lots and trained people. And at that time, a film camera was like $250,000, which quite honestly is not as good as your iPhone, in today's world. So, but, I looked at technology and I said, as technology keeps bringing down the cost of production, that people will have less and less dependency on having to come here, and that Hollywood really will become a measure of creativity, a measure of quality, but it's not going to be the place you have to be in order to make any kind of content. And we had, in doing celebrity, and celebrities, people around the world love Hollywood and Hollywood celebrities. We said where most cable networks, so if you're like ESPN, you're showing U.S. sports and stuff and U.S. football, and people in Europe couldn't care less about U.S. football. You had the Weather Channel, and who cares about, if you're living in Spain, what do you care about the weather in New York? but yet celebrities were loved around the world. Celebrities in Hollywood movies were loved around the world. So even while I was at E, I went off and started really concentrating on building an international presence for E. And E now is, in 142 countries, arguably the largest influencer of pop culture in the world. So even while I was still at E, a friend of mine who was a lawyer had some clients that were in the merchant banking world. And he said, Larry, my clients were approached with a deal in Russia. Would you go with them and tell me if it's real? Because it's a media deal and they're not media people. So I said, wow, that's an adventure. I mean, then it was still communist Russia or Soviet Union. It was even before the fall of the Soviet Union. And so I went over there and, I realized that things were changing, that the Soviet Union was going to be very short-lived and things would totally, I saw the fall of the Communist Party and stuff like that. But I met the mayor of St. Petersburg, because I was the only quote Hollywood guy that ever came there. And he said, well, with all the changes, we're not getting funded out of Moscow the way we used to, and the children's hospital and the orphanage have no money, and the kids are going to die of starvation. Would you help me start a music festival? And I'm like, well, I don't really know music. And he went, well, but you got to know more than I do. And I went, okay, that's probably true. And so we started this thing called the White Nights Festival, where every year between June 16th and June 21st, we raised 100% of the budget for the hospital and the orphanage in St. Petersburg, Russia. We would draw over 6 days, we would draw about 750,000 people to come there. And then, I would go to all these Western artists who thought that in a million years they would never, ever play in Russia. I mean, the thought was just crazy. So we did, anybody who's anybody, back in the day there. And, and then, and it was fun for me because I get to invite all the groups that I like listening to and stuff like that, and then get to go out drinking with them after the shows were over. And so we did that, and I kind of liked the place. And the mayor said, we really want you to stay here and, help us, make this transition from, Communist Party to more capitalistic. So, and again, I was still at E, so it was kind of a hobby for me. And then I realized that their life was so difficult at that point, and all that they would get to watch was bad news. So I said, they probably need something mindless like soap operas. So I brought soap operas to Russia, and we had a soap opera there called Santa Barbara, which ran 11 years. It was number one TV show in Russia for 11 years, 5 days a week. And, crazy stuff. And so I did that. But then with the music festival, I got to, I would promise people anything to come and play, because, the thought of going to Russia was odd to people. But I ended up working very closely with the vice mayor of St. Petersburg because he was the guy who really had to do stuff. So if I would promise an artist something that, I needed some government help on, the mayor would send me to the vice mayor and say, yeah, just tell Vladimir I said it's okay. Well, Vladimir was a guy named Putin. So Putin and I did that festival together. And then when he ended up in the Kremlin, which was a surprise to everybody, but he really figured out that if he's going to build a consumer economy, he's got to make media opportunities look a little bit familiar to Western marketers. He said people are going to want to buy luxury goods, the Gucci's, the Pradas, and, the Chanels and all of that stuff. And he asked me to work with the Minister of Communications on writing regulatory policy so that media would look a little bit familiar to Western marketing people. So I did that. And then a bunch of years later, China kind of came to that conclusion that if they were going to make this transformation from 100% communist state-owned media, they had to be a little more friendly to Western marketers. They liked the Russian model. So they went to the Russians and said, could you help us do ours? And the Russians said, no, there's a guy in LA that worked with Vladimir's ministers and he did it for us. So I ended up getting called in by the Chinese government. And then by that time I was out of I had sold it to Comcast. And I just said, you know what? Russia was interesting, but China is going to be a real challenge. And I was ready for a new challenge then. Like I said, we were in Russia for like 12 years or 13 years. So I just started doing stuff in China, first helping them write the regulation. And then I was teaching young TV executives, is with quotes around it, the process of creativity for profit, which is what they called it. Yeah, but then after they said, Larry, why don't you start a little media company here so we could learn from you? And I went, well, you don't let Western marketers in. And they said, well, we don't let the ones we don't like. And I go, well, okay, why are you going to be so nice to me? And they said, it's really simple. We have a fight with Rupert Murdoch. It's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. We have a fight with you. We go out for drinks. We scream and yell for one night. And then the next day we're okay. They said, for now, we'd rather do it that way. And so we set up this experimental company in China, and we do everything there. We do TV, film, internet content. We do immersive, and we do stuff that's more advanced than actually the stuff that you get to do here in the U.S. because a lot of technology is more advanced. I mean, my TV shows in China, 70% of the people who watch our TV shows watch them on a cell phone as opposed to a bigger screen. So you learn how to adjust production. People are going to be watching on a 5-inch screen, not a 55-inch screen. And we do a lot of immersive. We had in the U.S. we had things like immersive Van Gogh and those kind of new things. We brought those to China. We own immersive Van Gogh and Klimt and 100 years of Disney animation. We did immersive Da Vinci and stuff like that. And then we kind of got back in the concert business there, and we started doing bringing Western artists into China. And now things are a little tricky with our governments not really getting along very well these days. But we're still there and doing stuff, and we're totally non-political. So we've had literally no trouble whatsoever there because we produce only in Mandarin language. And we produce specifically for Chinese people, which they really appreciated because what happened was the people like Rupert Murdoch would go in, Fox, and he'd go, here's what I do in Australia, and I'll subtitle it, Mandarin for you and whatever. And the Chinese are going, look, we're 3-4 times bigger than you are, and we're really proud to be Chinese. If you don't want to produce for our people in our language, you're in the wrong place. And and a lot of that for me had to do with upbringing. My parents were immigrants and very strict, and if I didn't like the rules of the house, my mother would make it real clear, going, this is our house, this is our rules. If you don't like it here, go stay in the hotel. And that's kind of the way I approach going into these other countries. Is I'm a guest. It's like I'm a guest in their house, and I'm not there to change their governments or things like that. I'm there to provide them with a moment of entertainment so they can go to sleep with a smile on their face and realize tomorrow is going to be better than today. So, we're incredibly respectful in these other countries. And that's allowed us to be there. I mean, we've been in China for 14 years now, doing stuff that, like I say, a lot of it more advanced than the stuff I get to do here. But then when COVID came, the quarantine restrictions were so heavy that I really couldn't go. They wanted you to quarantine for 3 weeks in a Chinese hotel. And I'm like, 3 weeks in a hotel? I'd go stir crazy. There, I said, I have an apartment. I said, I'll stay in my apartment. And they were like, no, you got to stay in a hotel so we can monitor you. And so, but my partner, I have a woman partner in Beijing, and she runs the company there, and, everything was fine. And we would, Zoom a few times a week and stuff like that. So, but I was back here in the U.S. and I started, saying I'm not ready to retire. I don't want to learn how to play golf. And so I decided to start another company up here, but I wanted to do something more than the Kardashians or, any of that kind of stuff. And just started doing things that I figured had a social impact. So we created a thing on financial wellness for millennials because kids don't learn anything in school anymore about real life skills. Another one called Conscious Parenting, about trying to be a parent in today's really complex world, which is so much different than when I grew up, and I mean, now between social media and gender identification issues and bullying and shootings and stuff like that, it's hard to be a parent of a kid these days. And so we started something like that. We're doing something on cancel culture, which we think has swung a little bit too far. You can cancel. You don't have to, keep participating with people who deserve to be canceled, but you can't take them out of history. And I'm a great believer in that there are lessons to be learned from history. Let's not try and erase it, because then there'll be nothing to learn from. If you take away all the mistakes that you made, nobody's ever going to realize that, wow, they did that, and boy, what a mistake that was. And now I'm doing, it's interesting, there's no women in late night TV in America. When you think about it.
You're right, there's not ever, Joan Rivers was the last late.
Yeah, but Joan passed away. I mean, Joan was one of mine. We did Fashion Police, and then you had Chelsea Handler, and then Chelsea left. So there's no women in late night. It's all the same show. It's a guy that's on 11:30, and he sits behind a desk, and there's a couch with two people, and it goes back to, so Tom Cruise, tell us about your next movie. It's all about promoting what they're on. So I found this gal, I should say, or she found me, named Natasha Graziano, who was 8 years ago. Natasha was a single mom who was homeless on the streets of London. You cut to 8 years now, and she's living in LA. She, has gone to become a life coach. She's motivational, inspirational. She's life coaching will.i.am and Steve Aoki and all these other celebrities and stuff. So we created a TV show, a late night show that's going to go on in the summer around her. So it's going to be inspirational, motivational. So we shot a pilot, and we had Batch, who was a Vine star, who was one of the guests, and Gigi Gorgeous, who's trans and stuff. So it's very different than anything you've ever seen there. So that's going to go on in August. And now I'm involved with a lot of my friends come out of the New York LGBTQI fashion world. So I've been helping them with a bunch of stuff. And we've got a fashion-related media projects, TV, all forms of media really geared around the fashion industry. It's really interesting because fashion is one of the few industries where there's a total disconnect between the creative people and the fans of whatever the product is. So when you look at something, you say, I feel like going to a New York Knicks game, you go and buy a ticket and you go to and watch the basketball game. But what if all of a sudden they said the only way you can come to a basketball game is you got to be a player in the NBA? You go can't do that. Or a concert. If your favorite artist, you buy a ticket and you go to the concert. But what if they said, no, the only way you're allowed to go to a concert is you have to be in a rock band? You look at the fashion world and you look at all their biggest events, Paris Fashion Week, New York Fashion Week, London and Milan. The only way you get a Met Ball in New York, the only way you get to go to fashion's biggest events is you got to be in the fashion industry. So, me and some of my friends out in New York were looking to democratize the fashion industry and connect fans of fashion with the lovers of fashion, with their real fans. So we're starting a new thing called Fashion Club, which will create all these big events in the fashion world, but only open to people who are not in the fashion business. So staying busy.
It's always good to stay busy. It keeps you feeling young, as they say. Bless you. Now, you've been the forefront of integrating technology with media, as you brought up. Now that you have people that are producing movies with their iPhone rather than big equipment. I believe Lady Gaga, she did a music video that was all produced on the iPhone. It's great. I have the latest model version iPhone, and I can say that the video quality on there is a lot better than when I had the iPhone 11. Now, from interactive TV applications to AI-driven content strategies, how do you foresee emerging technologies like AI and Web3 shaping the future of entertainment?
Well, you get to, several things. Number one, for the longest time, and I used to get in trouble for this all the time, calling for the demise of NBC. And I said, it's a very simple equation. It used to be that if you wanted to watch anything, you had to watch it when NBC wanted you to watch it. I mean, we had a few networks, and if a show was on Thursday night at 8 o'clock, you had to watch it Thursday night at 8 o'clock. I said, but as digital technology changes that, I mean, you got to ask yourself a very simple question. And, people thought I was crazy at the time. I said, do you want to watch what NBC wants you to watch on Thursday night at 8 o'clock, or do you want to watch what you want to watch when you want to watch it on whatever device you want to watch it on? I think we all know the answer to it. So we could argue about how much time it's going to take for us to transition to that new technology, but we can't argue the fact that it's better to pick what you want to watch when you want to watch it. And if I want to watch something on my iPhone, I can. If I want to watch it on my 55-inch TV, I can. So we just think technology marches on, whether you like it or not. And that if it causes the business to change, so be it. You could either be like the music business was when digital music came out, where they spent 10 years fighting it. Going, no, we're never going to allow this to happen. We want people to buy, albums and CDs and stuff like that. And then they complain that, iTunes and Spotify has dominated the industry. And I say, you spent 10 years fighting it instead of embracing it. You would have been that. With the big thing now with AI is nothing more than a tool. It's a tool for creative people. You go back in history, you look at, paintings used to be cavemen would paint on the side of a cave wall. But then when somebody invented canvas and oil paint, they weren't real happy. You go to the late 1800s, we had all these horse ranches, and they wanted everybody to drive a horse and buggy, and they weren't happy with Henry Ford invented the car. And I tell people, I go, look out the window, tell me how many horse and buggies you see versus how many cars you see. There's no way, when technology has a good side to it, there's no way you're going to prevent it from growing. Now, you do have to have certain laws and regulations and stuff that stop it from being in the hands of people who want to do bad things. So, like you take the car, a great example. So, the car was invented, but a 12-year-old kid can't say, hey, I feel like driving the car, give me the keys. You got to be a certain age. You got to take a driver's education class. You have to take a test. And then, even when you get your license, there are rules of the road that if you don't follow the rules of the road, you lose your right to drive. I mean, I think the same thing with all new technologies. I mean, most of our politicians don't understand AI. They're afraid of it. And so we don't really have a body of laws and rules that say, hey, here's the good things you could do with it. It's fine. But if you do this bad stuff, there's going to be penalties for that, whether they be civil penalties, criminal penalties, to be seen. But, we're not up to that yet. Our governments haven't caught up to it. But you look at AI as a tool, I consider myself a creative. If you were to ask me, say, can you create a scenario for a TV network about, spoons or, pick any subject. It used to take me about 5 days to do the research and plot it out and do the PowerPoint and say, here's the competitor, who are the competitors, and here's some of the programming ideas. So it would take me 5 days. Chat GBT, I plug the same thing into chat and it takes me 30 seconds. And then I spend an hour. It's never perfect. So then I spend an hour cleaning it up and putting my humanity or my human side into it. So now in 1 hour, I'm getting done what used to take me 5 days. And I say to people, how can you not love this? I said, as human beings, we all have reasonably close to the same amount of time on this planet. I mean, the most valuable thing we have is our time. And so if I could reclaim 5 days, I said, look, I could do more of these and make more money. Or, now my daughter has had a baby, so I could spend more time with my little grandbaby. Or I could learn how to speak Spanish. I've reclaimed the most valuable thing we have as people. I said, yes, it's got to be regulated and bad people need to know that they're not allowed to do X, Y, Z. but it's a great tool for creative people. I just wrote a book recently. People convinced me to do it. In 4 days, my book became a bestseller. And everybody's going, "Oh my God, how did you do that? In 4 days, it's so quick." Yeah, I literally just went into GBT and said, "Create a marketing plan for me for my book." And literally I followed the plan, and 4 days later I was a bestseller. I mean, how do you not love that kind of stuff?
It's the best. I use Chat GPT like you. I throw my ideas into it and it
Yeah.
helps me make it into something rather than it just being a mess on paper.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then research and all kinds of stuff. And it gets better every day. I mean, with the book, it was kind of fun because, again, starting with GBT and then going to GBT4, and now there's like so many programs out there. So I think now I've been playing around with like Google Gemini image creator, and I just keep creating like new social media posts for the book, and I create an ad for me in, an anime style, um, or film noir style. And literally in 20 seconds, it does it. What used to cost me like $5,000 for an artist now costs me nothing. And I get it in like 20 seconds.
Definitely very fast. Now, I want to get, since you were speaking of books, I want to get into your book, your recent book, Off Script Recipe for Success. It combines personal stories with recipes. What inspired you to merge these elements and how do they reflect your journey in the entertainment industry?
Sure. Well, I've been a aspiring chef since I'm 12 years old. And my parents both worked, and my choice was to learn how to cook or eat peanut butter and jelly for dinner every night. And I started cooking myself, and then I would read my mom's cookbooks and stuff like that. And I just really liked cooking, and it's followed me literally to this day. I pretty much buy a cookbook every month, and I cook like the book and stuff like that. So my real passion is not television or film. My real passion is cooking. Um, and and I've always, been it. But if you look at my career, I grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up in Coney Island, Brooklyn, which is still the hood, hasn't been gentrified yet. So you have my Brooklyn years, my Manhattan cable years, my Valley cable years, my Russia years, my China years, the 8 different places or 8 different parts. And some people say it's a form of ADD, but who knows? But so I could segment my life into these segments. And then when people kept asking me to write the book, which I was always like, no, I'm not ready to write the last chapter, so I'm not writing a book. But then finally I said, you know what? I could do the stories from those times, and then I could match them with the recipes that inspired me during those times. I said that would be kind of fun. And so that's the way I did the book. So it's somewhere between a memoir and a cookbook. So like I'll do a story about something, and like one of the ones that people love in the book, there's a story about how I first met OJ, and the first time we ever sat down and had a meal together. And it was funny because I remember exactly what I ate there. And so it's the story of how we met, and then the recipe, that the food that I ate when we met. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff, which I don't know why, but nobody's ever thought of doing anything like it and stuff. And it's doing quite well. The book, like I say, is a bestseller. So
I'm going to say that I'm pretty sure every book that you have put out there has been a bestseller.
I've only done one, and I told myself there will never be another. Writing the book was okay. Um, I kind of, when I finally sat down to write it, it took me 3 months. So to write it. But marketing a book is a whole other thing. It's so concentrated and so much work and stuff. And now I'm going, okay, I did it. Do I really ever want to write another one? And the answer is probably not.
Now, marketing a book, I would have to ask, it's not the same as marketing like a movie or a show. There's much more detail involved when it comes to marketing a book.
Yeah, because the day it used to be, we used to have bookstores. You had the Barnes and Nobles all over the place. I mean, now there's a few of them left, so you don't have the bookstores. So the question is, how do you find people that are, that want to read? A lot of people don't want to read anymore, and that are interested in whatever the subject is there. So you really have to get deeply into the whole social media side of marketing and stuff. And then you look at things like, my book is on Amazon and Barnes and Ingram and then you got to start really figuring out the algorithms, because, getting people who know me to buy the book easy. You send them an email and they go buy the book. But how do you go beyond that and get people that are interested in whatever the subject is and stuff? So you really got to become very savvy in social media. And the margins in books are not great. The margins are very slim. So it's not like you could just start blasting out paid media there. You really got to figure out how to, get things moving in the social media world as opposed to the paid media world. So it's tough. But marketing a book is not easy.
It sounds like it's very intricate. There's a lot of steps involved with it. Now, throughout your career, you've built and led diverse teams. What core principles have guided your leadership style, and how do you foster innovation and collaboration within your organizations?
Yeah. Again, a lot of this is not thought out. A lot of what I do is instinctive and stuff. But when I was at Manhattan Cable and I worked for this guy named Nick Nicholas, who was really, really tough. I mean, he was an Ivy League time anchor and stuff like that. But he would always instill in me that he goes, Larry, in anything you could be firm, but everybody that works for you has to understand that you're being fair. And so I've kind of kept that throughout my entire career. It's like, it's okay to be firm and to be demanding of results, but everybody has to know they're being treated fairly. And so that's kind of been the underlying thing. The other thing is doing always just, I hired the smartest people I could find. Again, not consciously. I just said, you know what? I don't need to hire an editor that I could edit better than. I need to hire people that are smarter than me. And I don't care where they come from or what color they are or whether they man or woman or somewhere in between. If you're smarter than me, you got a shot at getting a job. If you're not smarter than me, So when you look at the companies that I've built, and again, not this is not a conscious thing. I mean, you take my companies now; they're 70% women, and because what happened, we just built this very nurturing environment for women. And then whenever a job would come up, the women who already worked there would say, as soon as it opened up, they would tell their friends and their friends would come in. So literally over the years, we've just built up this environment that's very conducive to women. I mean, in the Chinese company I'm the only non-Chinese person in that company and stuff. So we're mentally diverse and ethnically diverse and geographically diverse and stuff like that. And it just makes it, I mean, that's what gives us an advantage. I mean, how do I play against these big media companies and stuff like that? And is we understand the markets better than they do because the people who work for us are the markets.
That's great information to share with the world. Where if you want to achieve success, to make sure you have like-minded individuals. But
Yeah.
as you said, have people that are smarter than you take on the certain tasks.
Yeah. And, in China, like I say, I said when the reason Rupert Murdoch failed, and I use Rupert as the example of just big media, because he wanted to bring to China all the things that he does in other places. And again, going back to my mother's house, when I would visit my mom in Florida after my dad passed, I go, hey, Mom, tonight at 8 o'clock, I want to go for Italian food. And she go, no, we're 5:30, we're going for deli. And I go, but I don't eat at 5:30. And my mother would go, if you don't like the rules, go stay in the hotel. So we've kind of, approached that. I mean, we're a guest in someone's house and you got to be respectful of that. You got to be respectful of their culture and stuff like that. And that's what's allowed us to be successful in other countries where most Western companies, particularly American companies, have failed, is because we just think we're smarter than everybody else, and we're gonna show them how to live their life, whether they want to or not. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work.
So we need to embrace culture, when we are taking on certain things, especially if we're expanding.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like I can't go to a mall because it's this. I can go to a mall in any city; it's the same stores. I don't like that. I want to go into like diverse places. I want different. I think 80% as human beings, I think 80% of our soul is pretty much the same, but 20% is based on where we grew up and how we grew up and stuff like that. And that's the part I love. I love to learn new stuff and new cultures and stuff like that. And that's what fascinates me. I don't want to go to another mall with another, Forever 21 shop.
This is very true. Now, for those looking to break into the media and entertainment industry today, what advice would you offer regarding innovation, resilience, and staying ahead in a rapidly evolving landscape?
Well, first, pay attention to the technology because it's coming whether you like it or not. I mean, from AI to virtual reality to immersive, I mean, these things are all happening. Holograms. I mean, we're going to be able to have a play inside our living room because we could cast the characters in via hologram. So it's pay attention to that. Realize that there's the world of entertainment out there. It's no longer the Hollywood of entertainment. Look at it. So, it's go global, but think local kind of thing. I mean, you got to cater to that 20% difference there. I mean, like I say, in China, the biggest thing we ever did was just decide we're going to produce in Chinese um, and stuff. And they appreciated it and they love it. And like I said, the whole team there is born and raised in China. We don't hire anybody we hired people that were in the colleges here, USC, UCLA, whatever. They come in as interns. We take the best of the interns. We give them 1-year jobs. They work in LA for a year and then they go back to China. But when we hire them, we only hire people who were born and raised in China and want to go back to China. So that's what allows me to be able to really stay in tune with local markets. Our team in China, again, all Chinese, and we actually had I decided that at this ripe old age, I'm actually funny. So I wrote a comedy about the contradictions of modern Chinese life. It's what happens when you have incredible economic growth in a very short period of time, and people's social skills don't grow as quickly as their bank account. I mean, we've seen it with the Russians and the Chinese and the Arabs, it's like wearing Gucci this and Prada that, the mantra has always been now, if you have money, wear it and stuff. So I wrote a comedy there and I've never written comedy in my life, and comedy is one of the hardest things you can do. But working with my Chinese team, we managed to write it, get it on the air, and it ended up going 72 episodes there, and was nominated at the Asia TV Awards as the only comedy from China nominated in the sitcom category. And I said that's actually pretty cool to write a comedy for a country you didn't grow up in and a culture you didn't necessarily understand, and a language you don't speak. And we didn't win, but I just think the fact that we were the only one from China nominated that year was amazing. But in terms of advice that I give people is realize that technology marches on, geography has changed. Don't fight. Learn to embrace change. Don't fight it because you're not going to win. And be respectful of the countries that you're in. But the other thing that I find most people make this mistake is entrepreneurs. Everybody keeps giving people this advice: follow your passion. And I'm the opposite. I'm like, don't follow your passion because you're going to end up starving on the street. Like my passion was cooking. I mean, my passion today is still cooking. If I were to follow that, I'd be like, cleaning pots and pans in the back of a restaurant there. So I always say, what you do is find something you're good at, and then just make up your mind that you're going to become great at it. But it's got to be something that's going to be able to make sure you have a house, place to live and food, and you can feed your kid and educate your kid. And I said, when you reach that level of success, then you have the time to really spend on following your passion. So because, I've done and obviously, financially we do it. I have the time to cook and buy cookbooks and travel the world and eat good food. So become successful at something and then it gives you the ability to follow your passion. But if you try and follow your passion as your livelihood, chances are you're going to end up being very hungry and very needy.
It's I will say that from doing we're taught when we're younger to stick with what we're passionate about. As they always tell us that if you're passionate about it, it'll never feel like work. Now for you, as you shared, it's the opposite. Your passion is cooking, and here you are, very famous media mogul, entertainment industry. You founded up entertainment television, which is still on air today with the shows. Like as you brought up, you had the Kardashians. The list goes on. I'm having like a blank of all the other shows that have aired on there. All thanks to you, because of something as simple as going from an assistant cable splicer to person that has gone above and beyond and has put out there things that others have not thought of, or they did think of it, but then shrugged it off and went, no, that's ridiculous. We're not going to do that. That's not entertaining. And here you are, you're taking simple things and have turned it into what is entertaining and what everybody wants to see. You have brought a light to the world where there's darkness.
I guess so.
As someone who has consistently anticipated industry trends, what do you envision for the future of entertainment?
Well, I think AI is going to help create better and better stuff because what it does is it brings down the cost of doing things and the time of doing things. So we're going to be able to see more better and better stuff come out over time as soon as people get comfortable with it. Um, I love um, immersive. I think, there's a time where we just want to, come home from work, sit back on the couch and drink a beer and watch TV or watch your cell phone or whatever. But then there's a time when we want more of a relationship with that content. I mean, and it may only be 10% of the time we want that, but I think you gotta really focus on how do we give those people who want more, what is the more we can give them so that they stay involved in the content. That's why I love like a lot of this immersive stuff, and I think VR is fabulous and stuff like that. I mean, I just went on a thing here in LA where it was VR. You felt we're doing on a moon landing, and you really felt you were there, and it was just amazing. And I think the implications of technology on education are huge. I mean, I was on the board of the Einstein Foundation, which is kind of ironic because when I was a kid and I would have crazy ideas, my mother would slap me in the head and say, "Shut up, you know Einstein." And now I'm on the board of the Einstein Foundation, which is ironic. But when Albert died, he left all his IP to Hebrew University in Israel. And I'm toying with these ideas. I'm saying, if I go to a college and I go to a lecture hall, there's usually 500 kids fast asleep while some boring professor is preaching something and drawing on a blackboard. I said, but what if we can take Albert Einstein, because he's done videos and, there's news reports and books that he's written. And what if Albert Einstein could teach you the theory of relativity? I said, and I could beam him in as a hologram to any country in the world. And using AI, Albert could speak any language in the world. I said, think of the implications of that, because now we could find the best teachers of any subject anywhere in the world, and we could bring them to the world so that, a kid in Nigeria that wants to study physics will learn physics from the same teachers. If you're in Nigeria, you're going to get the same teachers that someone in Harvard is getting and stuff. So you pretty much can use technology mixed with entertainment to really level the playing field of education on a global level. What you think of what the implications of the world are? Yeah, I think if we all realize we're more similar to each other than different than each other, maybe we could find a place to be a little more peaceful instead of fighting with each other all the time. And so, that's it. VR, I think, again, sometimes people want to be immersed in the experience and, to have a deeper, richer relationship with it. So you'll see that. The other thing that I think is coming much more quick, and, we're doing this a lot in China, is really shorter form. I mean, because China, we started doing TikToks years before TikTok became anything here, because it's owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company, and this was popular in China. So we got to do that early on. But the other thing that we're seeing now, and again, I think change is inevitable, and I don't have any problem with change. So in China, one of the things we do is we can make a movie, 90 minutes, but we write the movie in such a way that we know that it's going to be broken up into little 2-minute chunks. So we shoot a 90-minute movie and we break it up into 45 little 2-minute chunks, and you can consume it in 2-minute slices there, and you can pay for it in 2-minute slices. So if you get tired of it after episode 7, you just stop paying for it. But we're starting to see that take hold here. So there, I think, China's a few years ahead of us and stuff. And for us, it's been great because we get to see where things are going before people in the U.S. realize where they're going. So little 2-minute movies, serialized movies, serialized content, inevitable. I mean, people's attention span, whether it's good or bad, is to be seen. But, between Instagrams and TikToks and stuff like that, people don't want to commit, 10 weeks of their life to watch a TV drama that requires an hour every week. Less and less of that, more and more of the 2-minute stuff. We see that trend continuing at least for the next decade.
That's great to hear. I want to thank you for your time today, Mr. Larry Namer, and I look forward to keeping up with everything that you are doing in the industry. How can our viewers get in touch with you or keep up with your trends?
You could, I post on Facebook regularly, but it's mainly my food blog. But you can usually follow there. My email is ljn@ljnmedia.com. People, I usually answer all my email myself, or you could just go to the LJN Media website, and that has a lot on there. So I'm pretty accessible, actually.
Thank you again for your time today. This is going to conclude the Summit Sessions podcast. I'm your host, Lady Katelyn Natalie Bracewell Swinton. You all have a wonderful rest of your day.
All righty, take care now.